So, hello once again, viewers. So, for this episode of the podcast, we actually have three new special guests. So, to my left, we have.
Nikki.
Ashley.
And Nick.
So, thank you once again for coming in for this podcast. Thank you for joining us today, listeners, on restoring the classroom. So, let's just dive right into it because we do have a lot to cover today. So, imagine a world where school suspension could set a child on a path to prison. So, unfortunately, that's many students in Michigan, and that is the reality. So, in this episode of today, we're going to cover what is the school to prison pipeline, how it impacts Michigan students, and what we can do to break the cycle in the future. So, to get the podcast going, let's first talk about what is the school to prison pipeline. Nikki, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I'd love to give some insight into what the school to prison pipeline is. It can be defined as an intersection of the public education system, K through 12, and law enforcement. There has become a trend of referring students directly to law enforcement for committing offenses at school or creating conditions in the school that lead to students being suspended or expelled.
Okay. So that was a great summary, Nikki. Can you tell me more about, how does that exactly happen?
So there are many contributing factors to the school to prison pipeline, such as funding and the fact that most systems were created on a white ideology that has many systemic racism lenses. However, there has also been an increase due to a zero tolerance policy that many schools have embraced. Specifically in Michigan, this policy means that federal law requires states receiving federal education funds to enact a law mandating 1 year expulsions of students who possess firearms and can also have high suspension days.
I see. So I'm sure there is definitely some statistics out there to back any of this up, right? Do you have any of that in store for us today?
It has been made clear from an expansive amount of research that African American males are 3 times more likely than their white male counterparts to be suspended or expelled in public schools. This has many contributing factors as well, but one big one is that there seems to be a high police presence at schools with a high African American population. In Michigan, 68% of incarcerated civilians are high school dropouts slash expelled individuals. With the zero tolerance policy in Michigan, some students are being expelled for bringing weapons that do not qualify as dangerous, such as eyebrow shapers and other non-weapon items.
Oh, okay. So thank you once again, Nikki, for informing us. So now moving into what fuels this pipeline exactly. Ashley, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Let's really talk about what's fueling the school to pipeline in Michigan. There are three factors that are pushing students, especially minority students, out of classrooms into the criminal justice system. One is the zero tolerance policies. Two, the use of school resource officers and the racial disparities in discipline. First, zero tolerance policies. These were meant to keep schools safe, but they expanded to include minor misbehaviors like talking back or dress code violations. In Michigan, we've seen students expelled or suspended for things like bringing eyebrow shapers or small tools to school. They're items that they're really actually not that dangerous. And when kids are pushed out of school, they fall behind. In fact, did you know that 6 to 8% of people in Michigan's prisons are high school dropouts? And these policies just don't punish students, they derail their futures. Then we see our overuse of police in schools. Instead of de-escalating situations or offering guidance, school resource officers often turn minority infractions into criminal records. Study shows that schools and RSAOs, which is the school resource officers, Black students are twice are likely to be arrested for behavior that normally would just get a warning. And in some cases, these officers escalate things unnecessarily, like the Michigan judge who put a 15-year-old Black girl in handcuffs just for falling asleep during a courtroom field trip. And finally, we can't ignore the racial disparities in discipline. Black students in Michigan are over 4 times more likely to be suspended than white peers, and Latinos face disproportionate punishments too. This isn't it's just like behavior about biases. Schools with majority Black and brown students are more likely to have police officers than counselors, meaning that students get criminal records instead of support.
Wow, I would have never guessed that. So what exactly does all of this mean for Michigan schools?
It means that Michigan schools are punishing students instead of supporting them. And it's time to ask, what if we invested in counselors instead of cops? What if we kept kids in classes instead of pushing them forward into the criminal justice system? That choice is ours.
Thank you, Ashley. So, having that said, let's get into what we can actually do then to break this ongoing cycle. Nick, do you have anything in store for us?
Yeah. So by definition, suspensions and expulsions exclude kids from schools. That's the whole point of the punishment. Kids are sent away from school, away from structure, resources, and regulation, denied access to their social networks and mentors, and left on the street completely unmonitored. Combined with a legal misdemeanor for one act of violence or a minor drug charge, these kids are shunned from what could be a prosperous educational life and thrown on a tight wire above an abyss that is the US prison system and told not to fall. The monitoring system of these kids shifts from teachers and mentors who are invested in the educational development to police and the legal system who are invested in the financial reward of reaching a quota of arrests.
So what is one logical way to break this cycle then?
It is by reducing suspensions. In Illinois, Senate Bill 100 explicitly requires that schools minimize exclusionary discipline practices, such as suspension and expulsion, while increasing the use of alternatives to suspension. As the Springfield Education Association summarizes, under this bill, schools are required to adopt principles and policies that reintegrate suspended students, such as time to make up for their missed work or mentorship counseling. Schools must reach an agreement with law enforcement as to what a police officer's role is within a school, and expulsion or suspension of more than 3 days is only to be used if all other measures of a disciplinary action have failed. While this is not everything, it is a good start, and the state of Michigan can adopt this policy to break the cycle.
That is a really good start. So what can the schools do then?
Schools can also reduce the number of police officers within their community and replace them with counselors and social workers. A school police officer costs a school about $75,000 per year, while a trained school social worker would cost a school about $70,000 per year. While there's a high variability of salary for both of these professions, they do not differ greatly in cost. Additionally, this does not account for the added state cost of putting a student through the legal system, a significantly more expensive process than going through school. A school psychologist is capable of helping the individual student access the resources they need while also advocating for collective restorative justice in schools. Effectively, the school social worker can work with students both to improve their individual behavior and to advocate for their needs as a collective student body, which are two resources that a police officer cannot provide.
So what should we do then?
So we can advocate for legislative change, like Senate Bill 100 in Illinois. We can advocate for the restructuring of the school budget to support more school social workers and professional counselors. We can advocate for the collective prosperity of a student body that is currently shunned from its own school. Or we could just sit and watch our own children go straight from school to prison without a chance to breathe. What would you do if you had the choice?
What a great way to end this informative pod, Nick. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in, the special guest especially. So, after listening to all of that, we now know that Michigan has a choice. It's either to keep punishing students or to start supporting them. So, before we wrap up this podcast, let's talk about what you can do as a listener. So, you can take action. You can seek resources to educate yourself and stay informed about the local school policies around you. You can learn more about the Michigan school discipline policies. You can join advocacy groups like the ACLU of Michigan or the NAACP Education Committee, or you can even contact your local school boards and demand for policy changes. So thank you once again for tuning in to Restoring the Classroom podcast. Don't forget to share this episode with everyone and keep the conversation going. Thank you guys, and thank you to our special guests for joining in today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lucy, for having being on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had a great time.
Have a good one, guys. See you next time.